Hey, so today we're going to talk about building reactive Drupal websites and interfaces. And specifically, we're going to talk about doing that with a framework called Meteor because Meteor is a framework that makes that sort of easy. And we're going to talk about integrating Meteor and Drupal and some of the glue that you can use to do that. This is pretty experimental. There's not a whole lot of examples of reactive Drupal websites or web interfaces on the live web. Here and there, you'll have a long polling block or something, but it's something that websites are demanding more and more, and so this is sort of an experimental approach to how this could be done, possibly in the future. So, this presentation is called Getting Started with Meteor. I gave this at Nice Camp earlier this year. So it explains what Meteor is, how it works, and then we go into Drupal and how you can sort of like marry the two together. I'm Patrick Coffey, you know that, and my Twitter, GitHub are at PatrickOCoffeeO. And let's talk about Meteor first. So what is Meteor? You've probably heard people talk about it, probably seen it on Y Combinator. You've probably seen a lot of people be like, hey, that's so insecure, and all that stuff. It gets a lot of attention because it has a lot of money behind it, strangely. But what is it? That's the big question. Nobody really plays with it or tries it out or goes past reading an article about it. So it's a JavaScript framework that enables developers to really quickly create reactive applications, and that's basically it. It doesn't do it's very unopinionated. It's not really even a framework. It's kind of like a framework for frameworks, and it's a lot different than a framework like Express or one of the other really common examples, such that it doesn't provide a whole lot of tools in core for doing standard web app stuff. It just provides a framework for communication between a server and a client. So, like I said, it only stands between the client and the server and facilitates the organized transfer of data between those two entities. It doesn't specify who the client has to be or what the server has to be. It just stands between those two entities, and it's kind of a key framework because it introduces some principles that are really important when considering developing a reactive application. First off, it's completely agnostic. You can stick Express on top of it and write it like that sort of architecture into your application and use Meteor if you wanted to do that. I've been talking with a sales guy about the sales JS guy about writing a sales JS Meteor integration layer, because you could totally write MVC stuff in Meteor if you want to. So it's like super agnostic. You are responsible for forming the architectural patterns, and that'll become really apparent when I show you a little bit more about it. It's super lightweight. It doesn't try to solve a whole lot of problems. Instead, it provides a really good extension system so that you can solve those problems and opt into those solutions. But the main point is that Meteor at its core is not a giant framework. It's just a really small thing that tries to solve one specific problem. How do you get data from a thing to another thing? So this is a diagram that really kind of shows what Meteor at its core is and what it does. So you have a client, right? It could be like a phone or a computer or a Roku or like this TV, if this TV had some sort of application that lets you view content on it. And that client makes subscriptions over a WebSocket to publications. And those publications get data from the collection API, which stands in front of a data store like Mongo, and then returns that data over the WebSocket to the subscription. Right, so you have this two-way singular connection. Now, these connections speak a language called DDP. It's not really a language, it's a protocol. And it stands for Distributed Data Protocol, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then on top of subscriptions, you have method calls on the client, and those call little functions on the server that can do certain things that you wouldn't want necessarily to be reactive. It's not like a data-centric thing. It's just an action you need to take. And that is done over WebSockets as well. And it can talk to the collection API if it wants to. In fact, you could just never use the publication subscription system and just use method method stuff if you wanted to, but that would be a really good way of handling it. So Meteor publishes code to your client and or your server. Your application is naturally isomorphic, and this is really important to understand because when I start showing you the app that demonstrates Drupal and Meteor talking together, you're going to see like a file structure that's not really, it's kind of confusing, and it's not what you might expect. So it's really important to understand that like Meteor handles taking code files and handles publishing them to one place or the other. And it can publish code files to both, like if you have a library, or it can publish files to a server or client explicitly. And let's talk about the file system for a minute. So Meteor knows where to publish your code depending on where you put them in the file structure. It only respects 3 different folders. Well, actually a little bit more than that, but there are 3 core folder names that it respects. First off, in the root, no folder, no subdirectories. If you just put a JS file in there, it will be published to clients and servers, right? So you have a browser, it's connected to a Node.js server, and you throw jQuery.js in this application root, and jQuery is going to go to the server and the client. In the lib directory, there are you can publish code files to the client and the server, but you by putting them in the lib directory, you are explicitly defining those items as items to be loaded first, as priority items, right? Because they're libraries. Things that are loaded after them will use them, and they must be loaded and ready to execute. The client directory, as you might guess, holds files that go to the client. And on that same sort of pattern, the server directory holds files that go to the server. The public directory holds media, images, files, videos, that sort of thing that can be served to the client. As an example, you might have /public/logo.png, and then that would be available at your application's root as logo.png. And then you have the private folder, which holds media files that are only for the server. The client can never access them. And that's all. Let's get that all out of the way so that you can like sort of grasp the difference between publishing something to the client and the server. When I say, hey, we're going to put this in the client, you know what that means. That's why this is important, but it's not really important as to how Meteor it's not really that relevant as far as what's really important about Meteor. So let's talk about DDP. Right? Remember, if you remember back, that little circle in the middle of the screen that represented the connection protocol between the client and the server, that was DDP. And DDP stands for Distributed Data Protocol. It's a protocol for fetching unstructured data from a server and receiving live updates of when that data changes over over a WebSocket, right? It's kind of like REST for WebSockets, if you will. So it's kind of like REST for WebSockets, and in a Meteor application, the client speaks to the server over WebSockets using the DDP protocol, right? So let's say we have a REST server, it's got an endpoint called people. When you do a post or a get to that endpoint, you are speaking to that server, and you're speaking over HTTP, right? But that endpoint might follow a RESTful format, and you would be speaking over HTTP using the RESTful rules for communicating, right? And the client doesn't really know or care that it's talking to a Meteor server, and the server doesn't really know or care that it's talking to a Meteor client. It just knows that it's speaking to DDP. Just like if you have a REST server, you might have an iPhone that's talking to a REST server, or you might have, some other device, and the server doesn't care, the client doesn't care. All they know is how to speak the language that allows them to connect and get data over this like connection layer, right? So the JavaScript implementation of PHP is what Meteor uses by default because it's a completely JavaScript application or a framework, if you will. And so that's what we're going to talk about, and that's what we're going to use in our examples. But there are implementations of DDP in like Ruby and Python and Objective-C, Swift, all those languages. So next, we're going to talk about the collection API. Just a quick overview. The collection API is an abstraction layer for talking to databases, right? Because we don't want to write Mongo queries or Redis queries for our applications when we need to get data. We just want to use a standardized format so that we can plug in MySQL or Redis in the background and not have to change our code base. Drupal has this sort of concept, and right now Mongo really works well with Meteor, and it's kind of almost exclusive to Mongo, but there are efforts to make Redis and a bunch of other databases work correctly. So I mean, it's a lot of work to write those integration layers, so it takes a little bit of time, but they are working on it. And they're actually releasing the MySQL integration layer for the collection API probably in a couple months, so it's got a really good roadmap. So the collection API is isomorphic. This is one really important part. You can run a query on the server, and you can run the same query on the client, and as long as you have a publication and subscription setup that supports returning data for that query, then you'll get data. So you can write libraries that interact with data and publish them to the server and the client. And that's really important because isomorphism is not really that beneficial if you're just publishing jQuery to the client and the server. You can kind of do that easily without isomorphic properties in your framework. So creating a MongoDB collection, right? We can create an object in JavaScript that represents a data object such that you can create instances of that data object. And that is called a collection, right? So we're creating a collection called My Documents, and we're going to put some documents in it. So here's how you would insert a document. Just an example, My Documents insert. I'm going to throw a title, an author, a body in there. That's cool. Here's how you would update it. You give a key, and then you set new properties, and this is how you would delete it. Property. And all of these actions would work on the client and the server, again, given that the data sets are synced correctly and that you have permissions to do these things on the client. We'll get into that. So Meteor syncs these actions between the client and the server. So yeah, you can run one of these queries, and what happens, right? You're working on a data set on the client, right? You delete a document. Well, how does that reflect and go back into the Mongo instance? How does that work? That's what Meteor really does. That's what it's really good at. It says, okay, hey, this document has been deleted. Run it through permissions and all that stuff, and go and delete it on the document if all those things are true. And you don't have to worry about it. That's a pretty powerful implication. So how does it work? So it works with the publish subscription API. Meteor provides a mechanism that syncs data between the client and the server. You just have to define what data sets you want to publish and subscribe to. So you can define those data sets really easily with the pub sub API. And here is an example of defining a publication, right? So we're specifying that this is going to run on the server, and we're creating a publication, right? So My Documents by author. And we pass in the author name, and then we say, okay, hey, make sure the author name is a string, otherwise we're going to return false. And then return a query, right? And then on the client side, we can subscribe to that publication. So we say, hey, if this is the client, we want to subscribe to that publication and pass in the author's name, right? And when that's ready, just console.log something. Once that connection has been made and the data has been initially synced between the client and the server, you can then use that data and operate on that data with the collection API sort of effortlessly. So publications and subscriptions are reactive. Documents that are added to the client and the server are synced. Kind of already said that. The permission system allows you to define rules around who could do what with your data. You define these on the server, and before an action is actually legitimately taken with your data, so you say, okay, update a document in the client. Before Meteor actually stores that in Mongo, it checks to make sure you say, okay, yes, you can do that. So you define an insert function. If it returns true, all good. If it returns false, you're not good. The other side of this, on the client side, is the reactive templating system. So you've got publication subscriptions, you've got this collection API that allows you to interact with data from both perspectives, and what do you do with that? Now you can work with data, but how is that useful if you can't present that data and allow a user to interact with it? Well, they have, Meteor comes with a very lightweight reactive templating system. And it's completely pluggable. You can remove it and replace it with React or something else if you don't like it. But it is a really lightweight solution that is just sort of a default. So here's an example of how you might use the templating system, right? So we have a subscription, and that subscription we defined earlier, and it subscribes to a publication and gives us documents, right? And it gives us documents by author. So now we're going to find documents by the same author, and we're going to pass it to a template. And in the template file, we're going to go through each of these documents and print attributes about the document, right? Now, when you take actions on those documents that you might get through one of these queries, those actions are synced from the client to the server, and vice versa. So let's say that you have two clients, right? And they're both looking at the same view at the same data. And one client changes that piece of data, and the other client does not. It's just viewing it. Meteor will sync that change down to the server and sync that, the change back up to all the other clients, right? The Reactive templating system also has some sort of like optimistic interface properties. So when a data set on the client changes, the client updates the templating system, knows which parts of the DOM it needs to be rendered when you change a piece of data, and then it tries to sync that change back to Meteor. If it's rejected, then the changes will revert, and the user will get an error, but it makes it Meteor applications a lot more usable over slow networks, and when you have a lot of load and you just can't respond to all those actions. The great thing about Meteor is that it has a packaging system. So there's a great website called atmosphere.js that contains documentation and listings for all the packages available. And there is a package to do very many things. It's very much like Drupal in that it has a lot of really, really, really well-baked solutions for a lot of really common problems. Like, let's say you define a data set and you want to create a form. You do that with two lines of code. Not a big deal. The other really good thing about packages is that they're structurally very similar to a Meteor application. So the same file system structure works. So you can basically write a Meteor application and just make it a package by adding one file. So it's easy to install and build and maintain those.
So the packages, are they, you said before that Meteor is more like a framework for making frameworks.
Mm-hmm.
Are packages like the framework then, at the framework level? Or
packages allow you to provide modular pieces of code that do things. So you could make a package that has a framework in it, right? You could make a sales package and then import that, and then have sales properties and behaviors in your core Meteor application. So there's a package API that allows you to interact with Meteor, the parts of Meteor that deal with data and all that. So you could definitely write a framework into a package and then just use that framework by installing it.
What's the payload size and performance overhead of using Meteor on the client side?
That's a really good question. So Meteor, the performance aspects of it on initial load are kind of large. It really depends on the application you're building, and you can certainly tweak that out and make it better if you need to, but if you've got a lot of files that you're trying to load. But by default, it takes all the client JS and it puts it up there, and it takes all the templates and it puts it up there. And so the first initial load might take a second or two to actually get that stuff. After that, you have DOM that's ready to render, and it renders that DOM, and then it forms the publications, and you get that data, and you actually render the parts of the DOM that depend on data.
So if it's isomorphic, why doesn't it send HTML over? Why does
it can. There's a package that lets you do that on initial load, and that's called like the fast render package or something like that. And it essentially sends over the network. And I might be a little bit wrong on this, but I believe that it sends the data objects and the templates necessary, and then it passes it to the client, and the client then renders it, which doesn't take barely any time. So, and I think you could probably actually have the server render it on the first load as well if you need to. Now, the really good thing about that is after you've loaded the initial application, you're only transferring very small bytes of data from the client to the server. You're not transferring CSS files or JS files unless you explicitly decide to load those at different points. But you would have to decide that and execute that.
I'm just trying to figure out, because like with most things with a good caching strategy, you don't need to load CSS and JavaScript for subsequent HTML requests either.
That's true.
So,
So
I'm trying to figure out what like the performance overhead and the cost overhead of loading Meteor versus like at what point does it become less expensive to use Meteor than to render a server side?
Sure, yeah. So let's say that you have a website and you're rendering that website, right? And you send back a page and it's been calculated by the server, and your browser has already cached CSS and images and that sort of thing, and all it has to do is render that DOM. The only thing that's really different in what Meteor is doing is it has to render the DOM after the templating system has calculated what that DOM should be. So that's the only time difference that you're dealing with. And then if you're rendering a huge list of documents, which you shouldn't be doing, then you're going to run into some time issues. But if you're rendering a paginated list that's pretty normal, it's hard to tell the difference. And the good thing about this is that in a caching sort of situation, there's no way to update that cache really intelligently. Does that make any sense? So if you have like a page and that page is cached, but a very small piece of data on that page changes, you have to re-render the entire thing. And on the server side, caching that gets weird and expensive, especially if you have components of the page that need to be dynamic and stuff. So you circumvent all the problems and the complexities that caching introduces, and the application just sort of naturally works out. It's like if you have like back in the day when you connected to a computer, you would connect over a terminal, right? And you would give it a command and it would give you a response. That's like the standard way that computers and browsers work, right? Make a request, you get a response, you render that response. In Meteor, it's a little bit more like what we have today with our computers and applications, where we might have an application that communicates with the server and gets data from the server, but doesn't have to re-render itself every time. And it's sort of similar to that evolution. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So performance concerns, that's a whole, like you could spend a lot of time talking about that, but I would expect that if you have really good caching setups in your browser and on your server, you could probably come to a really fast solution that would be maybe even faster than what Meteor would have, just transferring data between the client and the server, possibly. Again, it's the difference between sending a couple bytes of data over the wire and sending a full page of DOM that has to be rendered, even though the resources for styling it and interacting with it are already cached. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Fair enough. I actually do need to do a little bit of benchmarking and stuff around that, because that would be cool to have. Maybe somebody's already done it, but
especially on not Retina MacBook Pros, which is what most performance benchmarking is done on.
Right. Let's do it. Developers and yeah. And the optimistic interface stuff is really, really good when you have non-Retina MacBook Pro devices over non-blazing fast Wi-Fi situations. And so you can still get the reactive properties of the application, which you don't have with a load by load, render by render page situation. And you can do that and have the application still feel responsive. So that helps with that problem. Any other questions? Cool. So packages, they're great. Like Drupal modules. That's nice. Last part about Meteor that we're probably going to talk about is the build system. So Meteor contains a fully baked build system that allows you to create executable JavaScript applications from a development sort of environment. And I'll show you what a development Meteor setup looks like, but it basically takes all of the resources and stuff like that. Like, let's say you had less files or SAS files in your Meteor application, and Meteor was having to compile those every time you want to run the application. This command would compile them to CSS files, aggregate them, minimize them, all that good stuff, and then give you a node app you can just run with node app.js. And those builds are really important. The build system is also really configurable, so you can make builds for different environments and set environmental properties within your code base based off of what you're building for. So, Cordova, phone gap. You want to make a phone app, not a big deal. That's from a build perspective and deployment perspective. So Meteor and Drupal. There's a lot of talk about headless Drupal, decoupled Drupal, whatever your preferred name for that is. And it's a pretty good approach to decentralizing your data store and your data rendering situation. But what about like reactive headless Drupal? That would be kind of cool because Drupal is really good at storing content and really semantic data models and that sort of thing. But making a reactive Drupal component in a page would be hard, much less as an entire page. So what if you could take the data from Drupal 8 and make a reactive interface out of it? So let's say comments or notes about a live podcast or something. That could be really useful, and it could really improve the user's experience with the site, especially if that site is in the media sector of things. So that's what we're going to take a look at. I have created some items, some code bases, some projects that allow you to pretty easily set up a Drupal and Meteor situation. So let's take a look at that now. So first off, I have a Meteor application, and it is based off of a boilerplate that I work with. And it's really, really simple. It contains one collection and a couple of pieces of code that allow people to interact with those collections. So here's a collection definition. It contains a couple of collections, actually. So we have pizza collection. I can store pizzas, right? The title and description and price and that sort of thing. And then there's a orders collection that just allows you to store orders of those pizza objects. Those are collections. And then we have on the server side, let's just look at order. We have an allow function that defines who can and can't do different things with different orders. And then we have an order publication function that publishes all orders by the current user. Then on the client side, we have a we have a route called /orders that subscribes to all the pizzas, gets all the pizzas, and gets all the open orders for the current user, and then it renders the orders template with that data. And the orders template is almost nothing, it's really small. And then there's another part of the application that lets you create an order, just with this autoform type deal. But that's not important because we're not going to talk about that. So it's a really simple Meteor application, not a whole lot in it. And on the Drupal side, we have this content type that we would like to send to Drupal. So, and this is Drupal 8. The tools that will show you today have Drupal 8 and Drupal 7 versions that are pretty well baked. So if we go into structure, content types, you will see there's a pizza order content type. Ruby's Pizza Order, that's the name of the application. And here is the Meteor site running. And I'm logged in as me, and here are my orders. And here's how I can create an order in that type of situation. So what we're going to do is we're going to sync data being inserted and interacted with on Drupal for this content type to this Meteor application. And we'll see how that works. First off,
use Bootstrap for that?
I did. Dude, I'm not a front-end developer. I don't even know how to CSS. Don't get too sad, Sam. It's not worth it. Don't cry. So the first and most important component of this setup is a module that I wrote called MongoSync. It's a little bit strange, I'm not going to lie, but what it does is it allows you to take an entity-specific type in a specific bundle and sync that entity and actually run that entity over to a MongoDB instance. I am working on a version of this that is also abstracted, like the collection API that can work with anything, and you could write implementation layers for that specific DB type.
Why not have it just in Mongo? Why use sync? Because can't Drupal talk to a Mongo instance as well?
There is a module that lets you do that, and if you look, there is one issue, and it is instructing me to do that. So it's something that this module is something I created really quickly, and it solves a problem pretty in a pretty stable way, but it's not an ideal solution, so I need to improve it. But for all intents and purposes, it's documented, well, at least. And that module provides an interface on the site. That once it loads, this is a vagrant box, so it's a little bit shaky. If you go into this MongoSync configuration page, you will see that you can tell it to connect to a MongoDB server, give it credentials and a database, and then select different entities and say, oh, hey, here's an entity of type pizza delivery. I'm going to sync that to a specific collection. So, again, kind of interesting concept, but all of this needs to change. So you can do this and connect to any type of database, and it should use the Drupal integration layers with different DBs. So that's going to change. And then there's a connector module that says, okay, we want to insert data, but Drupal data is kind of messy, and Mongo doesn't really work with really complicated, deeply nested data structures. So we're going to clean that up. And Distill is a module that I've been maintaining for a while that allows you to extract data from Drupal entities and create well-formatted objects of data from those entities. And it does a number of very interesting things, and it allows you to solve some problems. It's not something that's going to be very commonly used, but it does solve some problems.
That's the one you presented about 2 months back, right?
Yeah. So, familiar with that. And this is the connector module that is installed on this site. And it's really simple, it just contains a couple lines. All it does is it creates a processor, asks for specific data about that, and assigns it to a new property, and then returns the value from the distiller, and that's what gets inserted into MongoDB. So MongoSync has several hooks that allow you to change data's format and that sort of thing, and it's just implementing that. So with that whole setup, let me do some magic here. If we split our screen and take a look, we go back into the site and then add a piece of content. We add a piece of content of that content type that we've told to sync to Mongo. We'll see that Meteor gets that piece of data and displays it without re-rendering the interface or really doing anything. My pizza order. 3,500. I want this photo. For me, and I'm going to save and publish that. And if you watch this interface right here, you'll see that it shows up before Drupal even finishes loading the page. And likewise, if you go back in here, you slowly load the content page and then slowly delete this item. You'll see it disappear from that interface as well. Confirm. So that's pretty much all that I really had to talk about tonight. Any questions about this?
So both ways. If you create a order over here and then you load the content page.
No, Drupal is the canonical data store, and the Mongo instance is just a cache that can be read from really quickly. And Meteor does, or Redis does such a better job at that, at like being a cache, that I just really need to finish the collection API stuff for Drupal. That would be a lot better, a lot more impressive than this.
What do you envision using this for? Like, what's an application?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I see this being useful in situations where you have interfaces that are powered by Drupal and data that's stored in Drupal, and you need that data to be presented in such a way that users don't have to refresh the page to get updates. So let's say you had a blog, and that blog did live commentary on things like WWDCs for Apple or that sort of thing. Drupal's really good at allowing people to post blogs, but it's not really good at creating reactive interfaces. So you could really easily hook up a Meteor instance, throw it up on Heroku, and have a reactive interface for this event, and that sort of thing. Like I said, it's kind of experimental. It's something that I've been playing around with, but I do see it being useful eventually.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to challenge you.
Oh, no.
Trying to understand
Actually,
the
right.
vision for it.
Yeah, right now it's completely not not really that useful because it hasn't been really deployed in a live environment that proves its usefulness. But I think it's just a conceptual idea that is kind of inspiring, at least to me.
What about for something like a simultaneous editing, or would it be good for that, or
Like Google Docs type
Yeah.
interactions.
or Etherpad is what I'm.
I have built those things in Meteor within like 20 minutes because it's sort of geared towards doing that sort of thing. You could definitely do that. I don't know how that would work with Drupal. I guess you could probably embed a Meteor application on a body field type idea, maybe, and that could work. But if I were doing that, I think I'd probably not use Meteor for that because it wouldn't make sense to have a server really. You would just, well, I guess you would kind of have to. That would be a complicated situation.
The Etherpad module, there is an Etherpad module that works kind of like that, but it's, in my experience, kind of brittle and
Yeah.
hard to get going.
That would be a really powerful feature for Drupal if it were conducive to doing that sort of thing.
I know that would be very useful for wherever.
That would be useful and just really cool.
How's this compared to, I know there's a Node.js module that kind of was trying to be helpful to use like the socket.io library. And it exposed some internal APIs in JavaScript that mapped to Drupal stuff, so you could log in and other things. And so you could do kind of this stuff. It was more work, I guess. But
Yeah, so I think that tries to solve a different problem, allowing you to communicate with Drupal over a socket. I've thought about trying to solve that, and DDP is a really good protocol to talk to Drupal over. It would work really well, theoretically, but I think this syncing something out of Drupal into a cache system that can be read in a live situation is a different problem than talking to Drupal over a socket and possibly having real-time interactions with Drupal over that. The reason I haven't tried to do that yet is because A, time, but B, Drupal's Bootstrap is sort of not long running, so it's like to keep a socket open that allows you to talk to Drupal. I see that being a little bit complicated. I'm not sure how that would work logistically, so I don't know. I'll have to look into it though.
I'm not sure. So outside of Drupal, are there any Meteor installs or applications that are worth checking out that you're really interested
Let's see. There are a number of Meteor applications. I think it's Kadira.io, yeah. Which is like it's a performance. It's like New Relic for PHP, but for Meteor and JavaScript. And let's see. How do I log in? How do you even log into this thing? Oh, here it is. Open dashboard. Just to give you an example, I did some testing on some Meteor microservices that I was creating, and it was watching my real-time application under heavy load and keeping up just fine and displaying like real-time graphs and that sort of thing. Live mode. Let's go back a while ago. Can't do range? This is a piece of crap. I don't like this. It just does one day. Oh, that's because it does it now. Anyway, let's go back to that day. I don't remember which day it was. That's the problem. Whoop. Yeah. So anyway, this is one of the tools that is a pretty good example of a really impressive Meteor application. The other one is it's like this real-time like community framework that lets you build real-time like hacker news sites really easily, and here's like the demo of it. So this is another thing that's pretty popular. And there are several production applications that are sort of internal to businesses that use this. And then one more is, what is that? Oh, the Meteor Slack clone that builds Meteor. Slack, let's see, where is it? Let's see. This is like they're getting, like they have basically a giant book on it, but you can actually launch, here it is, you can actually launch the thing. Oh yeah, here's a Slack. That sort of thing. And they have an actual live instance that has like thousands and thousands of people on it, and it's a little bit laggy just because there's so much load all the time. But it actually performs pretty well. I don't know how Slack would work with that many people.
If it's client, or if it's updating a client first before you put it. How does it show up as laggy? Does stuff show up after you?
Yeah, so you have like a chatting situation, right, where somebody submits a chat and that appears immediately for them, right? But somebody else submits a chat and that appears immediately for them, but it has to sync back to the server. So it syncs back to the server and you get that, 0.3 seconds later, but the messages are unordered and things get confused. It's a problem that's really specific to like messaging apps and real-time communication, but it's an example of complications in real-time technology.
So Scotch is the name of the...
Yeah, I think so. It might just be Scotch.io or something, maybe? I hope it's not something terrible. No, it's not that. Wait, what? I don't even know how... I'm getting
This is what we call bad user experience.
Yeah, I'm getting off of this website. I'm going to reach quit it. Yeah. Oh, it's Rocket Chat.
Okay, yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, Rocket.chat.
Because I've been looking for a Slack.
I think this might serve you well.
Without paying, basically.
It's just like logging with GitHub.
Actually, to host it ourselves, that's the real motivation.
And they're so Meteor just announced that they're releasing Galaxy. That's like a Heroku, but JavaScript specific, and you can run Meteor Galaxy deploy or something like that, and your Meteor applications like in a fully scaled live type deployment situation. So I'm excited about that. I'm trying to get pre-access to that.
How hard is it to, if you're running an app, what's the upgrade experience like? My experience with familiar stuff is upgrades can be kind of little.
So I have been developing strangely production Meteor apps since it was 0.4 because I was anyway, long story. And so the production cycle for this application, I was like really keen on using this for some reason. I just really wanted it. And I was like, okay, cool, I'll do that. It was really brutal because we were going through these iterations, and for the most part, it wasn't that bad. You ran Meteor update, and it sort of just worked. Updating packages can be a little painful because they'll change the API sometimes, and you might have code that depends on that. But at that point, Meteor makes it pretty easy to like
Table flip.
You can table flip, or you can just stay at a specific package version if you choose to.
What do you mean by table flip?
You get a table and flip it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Sorry. I'm listening.
So this is like a Slack. This is the actual live thing. I don't know. It seems to be pretty okay. Like, let's see. Let's see if we can talk to somebody. Let's see how that goes. Let's see if we can start like a direct message with somebody.
Because that's perfectly safe.
What did you
Demo your recording.
Yeah, let's just do this. Anyhow, so that's like probably the most like heavy loaded Meteor application that's available to everybody online today. It's like there's a lot of people on that thing every day, so yeah, it's a pretty good thing. Any other questions or comments?
Do you know of any other Meteor Drupal integration projects or anybody else working on Meteor?
Somebody was talking about it. I think I heard of one, but I don't remember what it was. I'll try to post that on the meetup in the comment.
Just curious.
I know it's been done before, but
I know there are a couple other node-related projects.
yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for listening to me talk about this stuff. Appreciate you coming by.
Yeah, that's fine. I've heard of it, but I hadn't